Okay, all right, we're all set. So these are the factors that employers are concerned about. They're concerned that you'll be biding time, right? And won't have, they want to see somebody who's got a commitment to them, doesn't just want a job. They want you to be contemporary, or me. They want all of us to be up to speed in our field. They want us to be, we have to convince them, if they're making a foregone conclusion like I did at Brookstone, we have to convince them, get them thinking not that we're unproductive because we've already had all this experience and we're going to kind of glide. We've got to convince them that we're productive, that we will put out for them. We're not going to cost too much, but we're going to bring a value. And in the larger workshop on interviewing, I really get into how to deal with that in salaries. I'm not suggesting you're going to work for minimum wage. I'm suggesting there's a way to show why they should hire you. And from peer mismatch to colleague, and this is the other thing they're concerned about. I cannot tell you how many times people have said to me that in their interview, the interviewer said in one form or another, well, you know, we have a young workforce here, right? We have a young workforce here. You know, what do you think that means? What do you think they're worried about when they say that? You won't fit in? You won't get along, right? And what's really important there, so that's what they're worried about, and there are ways to address that. But one of the things that you want to think about here when you're thinking about a younger workforce is, what are your biases? Because in my workshops, people will often start telling me, well, but the younger workers don't really work. The younger workers don't really care about the employer. The younger workers are just there for so long. The younger workers on technology all the time. Very strong biases. And I'll tell you, you cannot hide your biases in an interview. I'll never forget this one woman. We have to be so careful, and I mean, I'm certainly in this group. And we have to be so careful because if you're being interviewed by somebody who's 33 and you happen to be in your 50s, and they're asking you questions, there is a little part inside of us that wants to go, wait a minute, kid. I was doing this work while you were still in high school. You know, that's going on inside of us sometimes, and it shows up. I'll never forget this woman in the interviewing workshop one time. I was talking about being careful, don't parent them. And people are looking at me, I said, you think about it. You watch yourself with younger people, and how do you talk to them? Now, again, this wouldn't be for everybody in this room, but for people who've had a number of years of experience, this can happen. This woman put her head down on the desk and said, oh, no. And I said, what happened? She said, I had an interview yesterday. It was the last interview of the day for the company. This young guy was interviewing me, and he looked at his watch and he said, I've got to shut down this interview, got to close it off, because he said, I have to get over to such and such a road over in Greece, and so I've got to get moving. So let me, do you have any last questions, etc.? And she said to him, no, but let me tell you how you should get there. She said, because traffic will be heavy at this time. And so there's and she started giving him directions. Well, he went there all the time. She started, I mean, isn't that being helpful? That's what she thought she was doing, but she realized that she made an assumption he didn't know how to get there. And we don't mean anything by that. That's not vicious, and we don't mean to, talk down to somebody, but it happens. And so those are some of the things, people tell me great stories in the workshops. So how about being contemporary? How can we go from make sure we don't look dated, don't talk as though we're dated, and don't act dated? And I love this, I just happen to like this picture. I don't know why, but it really comes out of a book by Guy Kawasaki, who was the former chief evangelist of Apple. And he wrote a book called Enchantment, which is wonderful, about how people like you, why people like people. And that smile called the Duquesne smile is out of his book. And what he says is, people have a smile on their face that isn't genuine at all very often when they're meeting someone. And he said, when you're meeting someone, you should smile the kind of smile that gives you crow's feet. And so, you know, it's a thought. I never thought of it. I know, you know, you're meeting somebody new, you're a little bit self-conscious, and you're really worried about the interview and where you're going to sit and who else is going to be in it. And, okay, you shake the hands, and you've got all these other things going on in your mind. So the suggestion here is you have a handshake, and you shake firmly for 30 seconds, that you show energy by the way you walk in. I was going for an interview with somebody at General Electric in Maryland to manage a career center for them. And Mike told me that he watched me from the time I got out of my car in the parking lot. He never told me what he was looking for, but he watched me. So I suppose if I looked like I didn't have much energy, I don't know what he was looking for. But it's interesting. They're watching us to get an impression of who we are. Obviously, you would dress. People are always asking about dressing today because there's so much dress down. You obviously would dress appropriately for any interview, and appropriate is usually a suit, and for men, suit and tie. But sometimes if you're going to be interviewed for a truck driver, you might have a gentleman might have his shirt open. I mean, you wouldn't overdress. And I can go into more detail, but I don't think that's the most important thing. And make sure your language is current. In other words, when people first left Kodak, it was difficult for people from Kodak to get a job. And I had just moved up here then. And I started hearing about how difficult it was. And one of the things was there was so much jargon. There was language that was used at Kodak, but it wasn't used universally. So if you had acronyms and things out of your previous workplace, make sure they're general ones. Maybe make sure those are the titles or the names used for equipment, product, practices, etc. And then job knowledge. How current is your job knowledge? Because it's so funny that people believe that you lose it after 6 months of being out of a job. I belong to a lot of groups. I read recruiters' newsletters and get information from employers, and they believe you've lost it. It's a belief they have. I don't know there's any evidence of it, but they do believe that. So what you have to do is you have to change that belief. And you change that by being current in your job knowledge. Another way you can do that, by the way, is if you haven't had any training in your field recently, is to take a course and have it and take it online free, and it can be out of MIT and a lot of other colleges. They're free. You don't get credits for them, but if it's in your field, then it goes on your resume under education and training, and the course goes down in progress, and or in process. So if you know there's some new things happening in your field, and you want to make sure you demonstrate that you're current in them, that would be one way to do it. I don't like to be a talking head, so questions and comments are welcome at any time. Any questions? Yeah.
Did you say handshake for 30 seconds?
That's what he said. Does that seem too long?
Yeah, I wonder.
3 seconds. I'm sorry. 3 seconds. Oh, you don't want me to hold it. Don't. Hey, Bill, thank you very much. I've been sending people out of this room with the wrong information. Yeah, that's going to be, I think that probably wouldn't land you a job. If you don't want the job, you're going for the interview. That would be the way to do it.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Do you have this in print, what you're presenting up here right now? No? Okay.
No handouts from the career conference. There are handouts from the workshops. Okay. So from biding time to commitment, this is the other thing. I remember I was doing a workshop in Gates, and there was a gentleman who sat right over here, and one of the questions they ask is, where do you see yourself in 5 years, or 3 years, or whatever, but something related to that. And he said, retired. And we all went, no, because that might be your personal interest, but that's not what you want to say, right? I've got a great answer. Where do you see yourself in 5 years? And I like this. In 5 years, I want you to come to me and say, hiring me was the best decision you ever made. And I'll tell you why I like that answer. Because it says, I'm not going to take your job, which they're also worried about, right? It says, I still expect to be working with and for you, and I expect to be doing such a good job that you will be delighted 5 years from now that you hired me. So doesn't that show commitment? You know, it really shows commitment, and or something like that, your own words, but you've got the idea. Current activities, I talked about that. If there's a professional association connected to your field of work and you don't belong to it, it's a big mistake, I think. And you know, you can only do the bottom one here if you do the one thing that most people miss, and it's the biggest reason people don't get jobs that they're qualified for. You've got to research the organization because, well, take Rochester Works as an example. Rochester Works is, I can tell you, one of the most extensive one-stop career centers you will ever find. And I know that because I was part of the one-stop system. I opened up a privately run one-stop center in Massachusetts because the Massachusetts wanted to see if a privately run center would do better work than the state-run centers. We won a national award. I know what a good center looks like. When people call me from different parts of the country about coaching, I always say, let me look first at your one-stop center. Why would they might not need any coaching. They might have a really good one-stop center, although most centers can't provide ongoing coaching, but start there. I look up sometimes there's nothing. You know what they have? This is when you can come in to get your, apply for unemployment. Veterans can come in and get special things for veterans. There are no workshops. I mean, it's unbelievable. Although I have to say the other day, a friend asked me about a certain state and a certain city in that state, and I did find a fairly good one-stop center. So take advantage of Rochester Works one-stop center and the people here who talk to you. And one of the things, so when I moved up here, when I moved up from Maryland, I didn't have any business connections, and so because I had run a career center, I came in and met with people here, and I researched this career center. Let's see, this was 7 years ago. I researched it, and it wasn't as expansive as it is now, but it was already, I could see it was really great. You had a lot of things here, and so when you go in, every job, any interview that you get, you want to know everything about that employer. It isn't, you know, if I'm going into an architectural firm and I'm a good architect, that's fine. But I need to know when I go into this job interview who their clients are, who their competition is, and what's been written about them lately. And I'll tell you why. A friend of mine is an HR director, and she was applying for this job. And friends of mine, I mean, I have to be careful. You don't want to go around giving friends your advice. But if they ask you, and so I've always said, research, research, research. What can you find out about that organization? So she did the usual stuff. You know, she went to the website. She talked to some people in the HR association there, and she learned a little bit that way. But she decided to do what I call a deep-down Google search, and I have some materials on that in the 40-plus series. And what she found when she started looking more got deeper into the research was that 3 years ago, they were considering a merger. So if she's not going to go into that interview and let them know she knows that, but what she did do was this. She totally changed her resume because she was prolific in her field. However, at one point in her career, she was with a company that went through a merger. And I don't know if has anybody ever been working for somebody where there was a merger? Yeah. What's it like? Hectic, right? Everybody's happy, right? Yeah, everybody's happy. You've got two companies coming together. They all offer different vacation programs. They offer different health services. They offer, different sick leave. They offer different salary scales. And everybody has to give a little. And I know when my bank in Maryland, when they did that, and I would go in there, you never could get a teller to smile once that merger took place. And one day I said to her, I said, has this been tough? And she said, it's awful. She said, we're going to have to switch to their banking system, and ours is far more effective. And, you know, so there are a lot of losers in it. And if you go in and you do an employee satisfaction survey 6 months after the merger, employee satisfaction is in the basement. But my friend had helped a company go through a merger, and when they did their 6 months later, they had a very good report in terms of employee satisfaction. And so it's always how are the employees doing 6 months later, because if morale is really bad, things aren't going to be good there. So she never had anything on her resume about helping with a merger. But she thought maybe she should put it in, because if a company considers it once, it's likely they're still wondering whether there's going to be a good way to do that. So why not put a little bit of that in? Otherwise, she doesn't put it in an interview. Well, that's just one example of what research can tell you. So that when you go in, your answers aren't pat answers in the interview, but they're answers that are more appropriate for the company with whom you're interviewing. Questions or comments? Yeah. Who? Yes. I can't hear you, I'm sorry.
You said when you go in, you want to know who are their clients and what's been written about them lately, and there was a third thing.
Their market, their competition. Their market, their competition, and their market would include their clients. Right. And if anything's been written lately. Now, she never mentioned that she had done that research. It's just that she changed her resume to incorporate that. But, you don't go in and say, I looked you up in Google, and I found out that 3 years ago. You don't do that. But you do want to do your research. Oh, boy. We've had nothing but technical. Okay, here we go.
Rita?
Yeah. Okay.
Yes, Doctor. Thank you for doing this. I had some questions. Obviously, you've probably talked to a number of major employers in the area right there. Could you tell us what are the major errors that 40-plus people that like us make, that employers tell you that we do, other than what you've already mentioned?
That's where this comes from.
That's where this comes from? These are some of the major things?
Yeah,
I
the
see.
mistakes that people make.
I see.
Right. I mean, there might be others. I'm not saying I've got them all covered, so you might, people right here might know of others. I mean, the mistake the employee makes is not demonstrating these things, is assuming that years of service alone don't stand for anything. There was a time when the first thing you would put on your resume was 20 years experience in. That doesn't mean a thing today, because this is why, because people believe, oh, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Oh, I forgot. They're taping, and I've got to do this. That doesn't mean anything to say over 20 years experience, because there's a belief today that things change so rapidly that doesn't matter. And even before that, if all you were going to sell to the employer was 20 years of experience, that wouldn't mean one thing to me, because it could be 20 years of mediocre experience. It could be 20 years of poor experience. So obviously in that interview, you've got to demonstrate more. But if you've already got the interview, there's been something on your resume that says you're qualified, because nobody is getting an interview today who isn't qualified. So if you're there, the only way you can lose it now is either they ask a question and you don't have something that they didn't put on the job description, and you don't have the capacity to do something they need done. Because those position announcements, that's why it's so important to find somebody you can talk to, because the position announcements oftentimes, somebody in such and such department says to my friend in HR, we've got to get another person for such and such a position in here. And she says, you want to write up the announcement? What do you want? And he says, oh, use the one we used before. But things have changed. But nobody has time. You know that companies are working with smaller staffs and getting as much done. But nobody has any free time, or generally speaking. And so, yes.
Again, Doctor, something came to mind. Everybody in this room, I'm sure, has been aware of times have changed, as you say. I mean, you have to be tech savvy. I don't know if there's any jobs out there that you don't require to address the technology of today in order to get a job. But as probably everyone in this room is well aware of, many jobs require you to answer certain things on the computer, and sometimes I feel not comfortable answering them, like giving my social security number or our date of birth. But I mean, this is a requirement in order to get the job. This is the reality we're in. Now, but my question is, what can you tell me about some of these psychological examinations that the employers have been putting forth?
I have to stick to interviews today, but I would be happy to talk to you afterwards, and I can talk to you about those. I can tell you just, have other people had to go through some sort of assessments as they've been applying for jobs? Right. They're pretty much valid because there are legal ramifications if they're not, and in most states they can only account for a certain percentage of the hiring. So your results on that assessment, which might be assessing your abilities, might be usually, but they're quite good actually. And they seem to predict, some of them, I can't speak for all of them, I know, but there's one that my friend who's the VP of HR is using. She is so pleased with it because it does two things. They're a very humane, she's a humane person, it's a humane organization. It shows them, it tells them first and foremost, is this person likely to succeed in this position? And the company that administers that has a professional that talks to my friend who's the HR person. And so they look at it and they say, yeah, because this is what that position requires, and this person, rates this way and so on. But it also shows some areas for development. I don't think it has ever screened, I don't know if it's ever screened anyone totally out, but it could. It could be that the representative sits down with her and says, I don't know, because you really say you need this. But what it did do, the last time this happened, she was telling me, she said, this person's probably going to be an asset to this organization, and we're really pleased about that. But she said, I can see that, he might want a little bit of guidance. He might need a little bit of guidance here. So usually they're valid. Usually they can't count for all of it, or they're not allowed to count for all of it, and they have to be really careful about them because they cannot be discriminatory regarding race or religion or gender. So the person who takes this possession will have to meet very high productivity goals. Or we have a tight turnaround time on such and such a project. Or things move fast here, how do you handle change? In a 2-hour session, I can go into these a little bit more, but I want to take that last one because change seems to come up so often. So one of the stereotypical views seems to be, especially if you held one job for a long, long time, is that you're not going to be able to keep up with the constant changes. There's no reason to assume that, and I'll tell you how, I'm going to share with you how one person answers this question because I think it was great. He said, oh, change. Let me tell you about change. He said, in a 6-year period of time, I had 3 different managers. Each one had a different management style. One of my managers wanted to know on a daily basis everything that was done. Another manager said, don't give me the trivia, just keep me informed of the project. And the other manager I hardly ever saw. And he said, I had to adapt my behavior under each one of those managers to meet what they wanted, their expectations of my role. And I got a good performance review from all 3. So, because sometimes people assume you're in one company, you never moved out of your office, and there was never a change of personnel, and you never had a different boss or a different project. So you have to kind of bring people back to the understanding that change is happening everywhere, even if you've been in a position a long time. Now, come up with your own examples. Because and you will hear me say this so often, and you will hear them say it at Rochester Works, it is the stories they remember. And the stories are the examples. So if you haven't done a good analysis of your strengths and with examples of how those strengths played out in the organization, then when I look at a resume, if the question that comes to my mind is, so what? It's because it has no results on it. It's a job description. So what? Everybody in that role does those things. So what? Why you over other people? In the interview, the two most important words are for example. Because you can talk about your 3 greatest strengths all you want, but it doesn't mean much unless you can demonstrate them. And your stories of how they played out, you know, that question, you know, tell me about yourself, and you've got to decide what you're going to say. Again, that's where the research comes in, because you might choose different, obviously choose different strengths, depending on what you know about the company. So, for example, most important words, examples of how that played out. And in the resume, that means, okay, this person did all these duties. It doesn't say how well. Doesn't say if there were any results. And so, you know, keep that in mind. Things move faster. How do you handle change? You can also answer in ways like, I like that. You can just come back and say, I like that. I like things moving. I like that. You know, simple. Keep it simple. If there's anywhere, if you've been brought in, you're obviously qualified. But if you feel that you're vulnerable somewhere, if you're afraid that I can't think of a good example right now, but let's say that let's say you didn't leave your last job on good terms. And you know they're going to ask why you left your last job. Be prepared for how you're going to answer that. You're not going to tell a big sad story, obviously. You're not going to show any bitterness, obviously. And what you are going to do is move that conversation along. Because what happens, I don't care who we are, we're all vulnerable in some way. And so what happens is we're so worried about that. Oh, what am I going to say? What am I going to say? And when they ask that question, we stay with it too long. Because we're trying to make sure they understand. No, you figure out what you're going to say in response, and you say it, and then you ask a question. You move the conversation along. If you go into the interview knowing you've done your research, knowing what they need to know in order to decide you're the right person, you go in saying, before I leave there, I want to make sure they know about my work on XYZ project because it fits right in with such and such. I want them to know about how I handled the labor union negotiations. I want whatever it is, because I know that those are areas, and this especially works well when you know somebody in the company, but through your research you found out those are areas of concern. You go in knowing what you want them to know before you go. And does anybody here watch any of the Sunday morning talk shows, you know, where they have congressmen in and everything? Just watch, just for the fun of it, watch. Because most of the time, the individual that's going to appear on that show, whether it's a congressman or, you know, some public official, knows what they want the audience to know. And I don't care what question is asked, the audience will know what they want them to know. They will turn any question over to that. So you want to make sure that your story gets out. You don't want to leave there stuck in where you feel the most vulnerable, and you don't want to leave there without making sure they understand everything. And we're not going to spend a lot of time on questions at the end, but questions at the end are amazing. They are so powerful. If you've directly related experience, you know, so why are they afraid you're going to cost? Well, part of it is salary. If you've got a lot of years of experience, they might be afraid they can't meet your salary. But if you have directly related experience and they're not going to spend 3 months trying to get you up to speed, that's something that's an asset. Know the going salary range for the position, and you do that. I've got, I think, a slide here with some websites. Put at rest concerns about being dissatisfied. One of the things that does happen is after a person is the reason they still have concerns, even if you say the salary is fine, is because they're afraid once you start working, you're going to be dissatisfied. And that lowers your motivation. And so you won't be a contributor. So you know, have to make sure, and I've got some ways to answer those questions. Whatever you do, don't use your previous salary as a measure. You have to have an objective way of looking at salary because it really doesn't matter. You know, the difficulty is that for years we've given raises. We have rewarded people for years on the job. And a number of years ago, I heard employers say that was a mistake because years on the job don't mean anything. That was because they wanted your loyalty. That's not a big thing today. Rewarding for achievement, rewarding for getting the work done, rewarding for being, you know, all the things they look for, that's one thing. But rewarding for years in the job led us all to believe that after we were at a certain point in life and in our careers, we were going to earn more. Well, that's, you know, how a lot of us would go into these meetings now. If we're, you know, 45, 50, 60, we go in now and we're thinking, we've got all these years of experience. But do they really matter? I'll tell you what does matter. What does matter are not how well you did the, well, yes, it is how well you did the job before. But it's all the things you learned that young people can't possibly know yet. And I'll take you into a little bit more of that. But don't use your previous salary as a measure. Don't think, I mean, you'll have to decide. Obviously, you will have done an assessment. It's what I call a preferences requirements assessment. And that is, this is how much I would really like to earn next time, but this is how much I absolutely have to. And these are the benefits I would like to have next time, but these are the ones I absolutely need. And this is the geographic location I would like to have, but this is, I could go this far. When I was managing that career center for General Electric, they were closing a warehouse and a plant. And wonderful workers. And we were open 9 months before the plant closed. They allowed us to have the career center there. And I remember when we started out, we put a map up on the wall. And the people down on the plant floor, we were talking to them about how far away would they go. And they would come up when they were meeting with a counselor, and they would, you know, circle where they lived, and they were only going to go this far away for their next job. Because they had been there, made good wages, bought homes there, and the idea of traveling somewhere had not occurred to them yet. But I'm telling you, before the 9 months were over, they had expanded that geographic view because it narrowed them too much. And unfortunately, Westinghouse began to lay off at the same time, same type of workers. So the market was getting flooded, and so this is where I'd like to work on my preferences, but this is my requirement. I can't go any farther than this. Those are the kinds of things you want to have ready. I mentioned don't show your own age biases, name dropping. I've had people do that with me, and it doesn't impress me. Unsolicited advice, like the woman who told him how to get where he was going, and dissing technology. Comments made like young people are always on their cell phones. Don't say it. Don't say it. I can do everything on my cell phone. Everything. And so, you know, somebody sent me a message today, and it's a client, and I wanted to get back, and, you know, I mean, you can do everything on it. So don't diss it because it's a way of life. You may not like it. I'm not suggesting you have to like it. Just don't show you don't. Questions or comments? Yes?
Can you define what you mean by name dropping? I had an interview and I mentioned people's names that I used to work with at that particular company.
No, that's not name dropping. But sometimes I talked to somebody in another state, and actually just last week, and he seemed to think it would be really important for me to know that he knew the chairman of the board. It would be really important for me to know he knew somebody else that, not that I knew, but somebody prestigious. That didn't matter to me, nor was it relevant. It didn't have anything to do with his work. Now, sometimes I didn't make a harsh judgment about it, but that's what I mean. And the reason I didn't make a harsh judgment is when people lose their jobs, any one of us, what often happens is that we're in that place of just kind of, we're between trapezes, let go of one, but we don't see another one swinging toward us, and we feel vulnerable. And oftentimes when we feel vulnerable, that's what we do. We kind of are trying to show our strength. And so I wouldn't judge somebody by that. But if you were in an interview, so I wouldn't judge a person who called me that way. But if I were in an interview and somebody thought it was going to, just kept, putting out names of people that were prominent that had no bearing on our conversation, that would be name dropping. This is what I meant about you have leverage. You do have leverage because there are some things you only learn by experience. Because you cannot reach midlife and not have worked with a few really bizbos or whatever you want to call them. I mean, haven't you worked with people that didn't carry their share and you picked up the slack for them, or people that would always get some rumor going, or people that seem to be so focused on looking out for themselves that you may have not have felt that they always acted in the best interest of the company? I mean, we've all known people like that. And then we've also known people that we've admired the way they worked, we've learned from them, we love to be on their team. But you had to learn, I'm suspecting, how to get along with both of those groups. And you don't learn those interpersonal skills. I mean, I know because I have grandchildren. And, they are bright as anything, forging good careers, but they don't have a lot of that knowledge that only comes from being in situations where you have to moderate your own behavior. I do a workshop on emotional intelligence, and if you wanted to just boil down emotional intelligence, what it means is being aware of our emotions, number one. So if I'm angry, being aware that I'm angry. Being aware of the effect of my emotions if I'm talking to Joe on Joe. So I have to be able to read the other person, and I have to be able to take that in. And adapting my behavior for appropriate behavior there. And so that's what that's all about. But I don't think most of us grow up with that. It's something you learn when you're in the workplace. So you have the interpersonal skills, but you have to be able to demonstrate that. So some of the questions they will often ask is, if they're doing a behavioral interview, they'll ask, was there ever a time when your boss wanted something done that you felt was not in the best interest of the company? And they'll often put it this way: if your boss wanted something done that was not in the best interest of the company, how would you handle that? They just want to know how you would handle it, right? And that's what they're thinking about. And you should have ways of addressing that most young people would not have. I don't want to classify all young people as not having those skills, but and you also have adaptability and steadiness, ability to get along with many people, and you perhaps have performed successfully under multiple supervisors, or maybe there were changes in your organization, or maybe you've had a various number of jobs and had to adapt. But years of experience by themselves are not marketable. Comments or questions? Yes.
On the slide, it's adaptability and steadiness. Again, it's a fine line there between being adaptable, showing that you can be adaptable, and not being stuck in the same maybe old ways. You know what I mean? So it's kind of confusing there, but I think
steadiness is more being able to keep your eye on the prize. No matter what else is going on, you might have to adapt, but you're steady. You're on course. There are a lot of ways you could interpret that probably. What are the two most, I already said, the two most important words in an interview are for example. So here's a position requirement, requisition of a new product line, and your qualification is your project management skills and experience. But that's not enough. Just saying to them, well, yes, I've had years of doing that, and I know what that entails, is not enough. For example, I led the creation of a winning product prototype coming in under deadline at cost savings of 15%. We don't always come in under deadline, but make sure you have a result. There are various ways in which you demonstrate that it was done well. So led creation of a winning product prototype, and that was successfully used throughout the company, or whatever it is. But carry that line a little further, because that's what they remember when you leave. Yes.
And working on this, I had trouble coming up with numbers for, some of these things that, something I did 5-10 years ago and don't have access to the company.
Yeah, you don't always have numbers. Things aren't always quantifiable by numbers. So if there were numbers years ago and you can't remember the numbers, you can say approximately X percent. So you can use a percentage. Oftentimes, if your work is with a small company, it's better to use percentage than numbers because the numbers wouldn't be that high. But some things can't be quantified by numbers, but they can be quantified by the company which the company continued to use, or which I've got a lot of examples, but which the company company continued to use this for years, or which shortened the period of time from such and such, or which resulted in higher customer satisfaction, or which created employee loyalty. There are other things. Obviously they have to be honest, and obviously they have to be relevant. Your strengths, when they ask that question, it's always better to have your answer coming from somebody else's mouth. So rather than saying, well, I'm dependable and energetic and up to date, it's better to say, well, I've been told that. And go make sure you've been through all your performance reviews, and anything that you've been continually cited for, you mention that. You don't show your performance reviews, but you mention that on my performance reviews, or my supervisors consistently cited, and then you mention what it is. Or people tend to talk about my ability to, so start your sentences out that way. Rather, always have it be coming from outside of yourself. You seem overqualified. Has anybody in here had an interview where this has come up? Have you? That you were overqualified? Yeah. That's a tough place to be. I mean, don't you want to say, I want to say, well, would you rather have me underqualified? Yeah, so how have you found a good way to handle it? What'd you say? Oh. Yeah. I think we don't often realize that we can get more involved in this conversation than we are, because most of the time we're feeling like we're on the hot seat. But the concern behind that is that you won't be happy in the position, or you won't stay, or you will cost too much. And so you have to convince them otherwise. And that can be things like, can you tell me, I really encourage people to use this. When they make blanket statements that's not clear what's really behind the statement, you ask a question. And you say, can you tell me more? Can you tell me more about that, what you mean by overqualified? Get them to say more, because oftentimes what you're thinking they mean is not at all what they mean. So get them to say more, and that should help you respond.
So you said there that one thing that the concern you won't stay. So what is the expectation you find from employees in terms of how long to stay?
That is what's the expectation of employers in terms of how long you'll stay? I don't think they know, number one. And number two, young people don't stay either. In fact, study out of the University of Massachusetts a few years ago, they surveyed graduates of an MBA program, and they asked them, the market was good at the time, and they asked them how they were going to choose their first job, what was going to be the primary criterion, and how long did they expect to stay. The answer to the first question was salary. They were coming out with a lot of debt, and they wanted to start earning, right? The second question was 3 to 5 years. And what else would convince you it was the right employer? Ongoing training and development. They're going to move through life knowing you've always got to keep training. And so they're not going to, young people don't feel loyalty to employers in most cases. A lot of what I'm saying are generalizations. But they're not looking at employers like it's the employer that shapes their career. They're looking at careers that are mobile. And so the question about how long do they expect us to, I think it's a crazy thing. What they don't want is that 9 months from now, that a better job is going to, the market's going to get better, and you're going to get offered a better salary, and you're going to leave them. They don't want that. But I don't think they mean 10 years or, no. I think it's just they're afraid you're going to be in and you're going to be right out because they feel that you were that you're not going to be making enough money or something. There's one of the answers that can be used. Finding the right position where I can use my skills and work for an employer where I feel I can make a difference is what's important to me. I wouldn't be here today if I were not serious about making a commitment to Johnson & Johnson, and there must have been something you saw in my qualifications that made you interested. You don't get an interview today unless you're qualified. So you are there because you're qualified. So there must have been, are there any other concerns you have about my qualifications? Most of the time, I would bet it's most of the time, they just need to be convinced. They need reassurance. They want you. They brought you in. They need reassurance that it's going to be all right and that they're making the right decision because it costs money to bring people into the company. What are your salary requirements? Has anybody had to give their salary requirements out in an interview?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. How did you handle it?
I just gave a broad figure and hope it fell into place.
Okay, and how did you come up with the figure?
I based it on what I had received before and just figured it was a fair price for where I went.
Okay.
I went on to a couple of websites that told me what the starting rate was for that area, and that was my bottom line, and then my top line was around what I was
Okay.
looking for.
So you researched it on websites, found out the range. Now, did you, when you responded to them, did you say a range or did you say a certain amount?
This is my minimum would be, and this is what
Okay.
would be what I would love, but my minimum
Okay.
is this, and I am comfortable with the minimum.
Okay, good. She'd be comfortable with the minimum, but this is what she was hoping for. What else? Yeah.
Decades ago, before the internet where you can research things, I was asked, are you married? Are you in love? Which, in other words, what's your expenses?
Yeah.
And I basically said, the going rate. I knew what going rate was at the time.
Yeah.
I said, I'm looking for that going rate. They want to know what my expenses were.
Are you married? Are you in love? And what are your expenses? Wow. They couldn't do that today. Yeah, right. Okay, so
This was back in the 80s.
in the 80s, yeah. I mean, some things got better.
But it's one of those you'll never forget it. That much.
No, that is, salary, so determining your market value. Yeah, is there another question? Yeah.
I just wanted to say, I had the same thing, kind of the same thing happen to me. I was gonna, I filled out an application in, I live in Hamlin, and this one was in Rockport for something. And one of the questions on the interview was, do you plan on getting married and having children?
On the interview, or the application? The application asked if you were planning to get married and have children.
And I wasn't even dating anybody at the time.
It's against the law.
And then the guy didn't even have the decency to show up for the interview. I showed up for the interview about 10 minutes early, and they said, oh, well, he's going to be about an hour late. And I said, well, tell him to forget it.
And then he didn't show up on time for the interview. I wonder that you would have wanted to work there. When they ask a question, I mean, are you married now? They shouldn't even ask that, but that's one thing. But are you planning? How can you know if you should? Yeah, too bad he didn't come. You could have asked him, do you have somebody in mind? What? It isn't any of their business, and they shouldn't be asking it, and they can get into trouble. But often interviewers are not trained, and companies get in trouble that way. That's why when you call them afterwards and you haven't gotten the job, but you want to maybe talk to them about what they were looking for, or would they. What I usually suggest is that when you call after if you wanted to get some feedback, they're not going to give you the express reason they chose somebody usually. But what you can ask are things like, I know you've made your decision, and I honor that. I know you need to get the right person for the job, and that's great. But it would be really helpful to me if you could give me some feedback on the way in which I interview.
And I was told one time I was overconfident.
You were told you were overconfident?
I'm thinking, how would you know if I'm overconfident if I haven't even shown you?
Yeah.
Like,
But you might have asked them what you said that made them think that, right? But that's interesting. But they said something to you, right?
There was another place I interviewed for at one time, and I didn't get the job because when I go for my interview, I wear like a dress or a skirt. They said I was overdressed. They required people to wear jeans. And I said, well, I wasn't told that before the interview, and I do have jeans. And they said, well, we already hired somebody else.
Well, see, the thing, all right, so, I mean, that's a ridiculous response. But the point is, you probably never get the real reason.
Yeah.
You know, you probably never get the real reason. But there are two things I would like to mention. That you can get some good information if you do call back and ask about how, would they make any recommendations for your how you interviewed or what you might do in the interview. Because I know people that have gotten some ideas, things they never thought of, that maybe something they said and they didn't realize how it could be construed. The other thing that's really important is to write a thank you even when you didn't get the job. And I know a woman who was one of the only women at the GE plant in Maryland on the management team. And she wanted to switch into this other field, and she had a real aptitude for it, and she had some experience in it. And she had several interviews with this company, and they called her to say they had selected somebody else. She came into the office and was telling us, into the Career Center, and was telling us, and she said, I am so disappointed. She wrote them a letter, and she said to them that how much she enjoyed meeting them, how she understood that it's a difficult decision. She appreciated them letting her know so soon, and she wanted to once more state that if there was ever an opportunity, she would love to be a part of their group. They called her and said, we think we've been too hasty. I don't know what happened in between, but it doesn't matter what happened in between. Maybe they learned a little bit more about the person they thought they were going to hire. Who knows? Doesn't matter. She kept the lifeline going by following up that way, because it's embarrassing to them to call back somebody they told didn't get the job. You know, so anyway, you just never know. I'll tell you something. I know we're out of time, but my friend that's the VP of HR in Bethesda, Maryland, gives me all kinds of stories because she says, I know you like to tell these in your workshops. And she said the other day a young woman came in for an interview, and she laid her things out on a table, and she had her thank you notes to the interview team already written. And she left them there when she left, and it said, I so enjoyed our conversation today. You were so gracious. She wrote it before she met them.
oh my God.
And she said, Rita, you got to tell people who would think, you know. And, of course, she wasn't considered. I mean, you got to be a little smarter than that, right? Funny things do happen. Okay, so determining your market value, we talked about that. Sometimes you have a unique competitive edge, and that does put you ahead of the game. How do you stack up against the competition? These are some sites, salary.com, Career Journal, Pay Scale. And you can, in many of them, you can go right to your geographic location because these salary scales differ in different parts of the country. And then just search Google for salary sites. And you can also go to Glassdoor and look up companies. I think most people probably know that. Okay, so it's jobsearch.org, PayScale, salary.com, and Career Journal. You can only answer the salary question if you've identified a range, have determined your market value. Another friend of mine, again, as I said, you have to be careful about giving any advice to friends, but I had this friend who's very qualified, and she wasn't getting the offers. And now she had several wonderful interviews with this company, and they were bringing a woman up from Florida to meet with her, and that woman would make the decision, probably right on the spot. And so she didn't get the offer. And so I remember I said to her, what salary did you ask for? And she told me, and I said, well, how did you know what salary to ask for? She said, well, they put a range out. And I said, where was this on the range? It was the top. She asked for the top of the range. Now, this is why, and I mean, she knows me well, but I can't indoctrinate my friends. She knows that I say, you know, it doesn't matter what you earned before. But she asked for the top, and the woman said to her, anyway, she found out she didn't get the job, and when she talked to the woman who came up from Florida, she said, people in that area seem to want too much money. She lost that over that answer. It would have been a wonderful job. And so not only was it, I think, a mistake to ask for the top of the range, because where can they go with her after that? But there's another reason it was a mistake. The company she was going to go to work for had offices in 3 different states. Her previous experience was with a company of 149 people, all located in one building. When you're going to be working with people with offices in 3 different states, that's a very different ball game. So my question always is, are you a lightweight, a welterweight, or a heavyweight? And she wasn't a heavyweight there because she had no experience with a multiple office company. So you have to ask yourself, where do you stand on things when you decide what salary you're going to ask for? Make sure you ask good questions and that you're aware of the labor market and competition. And finally, it isn't over till it's over, of course. Yes, a question.
What if they ask before you apply, put your salary expectation, without that we won't even consider it? That put you in a, because you don't know what the company detail yet, they're not disclosing it. How do you handle that?
The application process today online is what screams out so many people because they ask for information right up front. You've got to research it. You've got to try to find, I mean, that's why social media is so important today. Because if you've got 500 contacts, you're going to know, somebody's going to know somebody in that company. It's highly likely. You need to get some inside information. And so you have to try the best way you can. You know, you've got to kind of try to figure out what their salary ranges are. Otherwise, you're just guessing. And so they insist that you put something down on your application, and you've got to make a choice. They're not going to look at it if you don't complete it. So you have to make a choice. And make sure remember I talked about preferences and requirements. Make sure it's never below your requirement. The problem with it is that you can't put in there negotiable, or I need to know more about the position. You just have to put a figure in. That's why online job searching is the least effective for people in mid-career. It is the least effective, and recruiters will tell you that. Because you have to put too much, you're required to put information down. But once they knew you, that salary that you put down might be a little higher than they were thinking about bringing somebody into the company, but once they met you and talked with you and found out what you could bring and how well you were going to fit in, that might be fine. But they haven't met you. They haven't looked at your references. But if you have really good recommendations on your LinkedIn profile, I mean really good, that talk about your work, your expertise, that will be helpful. Because I'll tell you, every HR person I know looks at LinkedIn. That's how my friend recruits in Bethesda, Maryland, through LinkedIn. A few other places, but through LinkedIn. Pays for that. Post their jobs on LinkedIn, and then people can look you up. So make sure if you say you're an auditor, and so pretend you're looking for an auditor, and go in and search for an auditor, and if your name isn't coming up on the first 2 pages, employers will probably never see you. So that means your profile has to be written very, very well with keywords. I think writing the profile is one of the most complex activities of the job search. It's harder than the resume, I think, because you want the search engine to find you, and the search engines aren't going to find you unless you have keywords in there.
Do they have people to help you fill out those things, or are you just kind of floating in the water with that?
Well, Rochester Works offers workshops on LinkedIn. Yeah. Yeah, they've got workshops, but I think, I'll tell you quite truthfully, if I were looking for a job today and I didn't know much about LinkedIn, I would pay for it. I'll tell you why, because I know myself, I would need somebody to sit down with me and do it, not a workshop. In the workshop, I'll get how to use LinkedIn, and I'll get the purposes of it and the advantages of it, and I'll get some ideas about it. But writing is a complex activity. And so to write a good profile that sells you to the market you're interested in, that's different. Now, I do one of my workshops, one of the 40-plus workshops does show some work by Jason Alba on profiles, etc. So if you, there's one on LinkedIn, we'll have a workshop on LinkedIn coming up. But Rochester Works has them. So I would, even if you have to take it more than once, because I don't know about you, but for a lot of us, this is so new, and you don't learn it that quickly.
The next one is January 20th.
January 20th is a LinkedIn workshop. Is it Waring Road?
Yes.
Great.
15 minutes.
You have to register. Take advantage of this wonderful one-stop career center. So these are the most frequent mistakes, and this will end the program, but lack of understanding of the company. It really, really annoys interviewers when somebody says, "What do you do here?" Could you believe? Unprepared to discuss skills and experience. No sense of direction, just want a job. Lack enthusiasm. Sometimes people are just nervous. No questions for the interviewer. Fail to send thank yous. And for more experienced workers, that they don't seem to have much energy or motivation. That's what recruiters cite. You'll interview well if you research and practice. You'll handle the overqualified concern well if you do that. You'll demonstrate your value with preparation. And you can address the salary questions with self-assessment and research. So questions, comments, or hostilities before we end this?
I got one quick one.
Yes.
One of the handouts that I got from Waring Road, it was all pay scale related. And if the employee asks what's the pay first, whoever asks this question on pay first usually is the loser in the back and forth. What's the pay from the employer and
Well, they used to say don't talk about salary until the second interview. It doesn't work anymore in most cases. I'm sorry, it just doesn't work. And don't be the first to mention it, but they won't let you get by with it. Many of them won't. So if you can turn around and say, well, what do you, these are some answers in the handouts in the workshops, but, what do you usually offer for this position, a new person in this position? And express that, you can say new person. If you really want the job, I would say, what do you usually offer a new person in this position? Because that already, the way you get rid of their biases is so subtle. Little things you say or don't say. And one of them is by saying, new person. You're not expecting to come in as 20 years with the company.
Yeah, as far as that question, if you say I need $25 an hour, the employee says I need $25 an hour, they can always knock you down, but you're not going to go back up above 25.
Right. But as I say, they don't always, it used to be, be careful, because once you name it, that's what you're going to get, right? Yes.
I'd like to thank you, Doctor, for your presentation. I have a few questions. So you're saying basically not to ask for stock options, a private jet, and a limo.
I can't speak for everybody in the room. Maybe some people in here feel they should get that.
Going back to your slides there, you raise a number of issues, that we all have to go through. A lot of times references. What can you tell us about references? You'd want to have somebody that's going to speak well of you, obviously.
Yeah, and I wish I could, but we're 15 minutes over. I am so sorry, but that's a really good question. It's not an interviewing question, but that doesn't matter. And if you want to hang around for a few minutes.
You mentioned that. Do employers check your social media?
First, for not every job, not a truck driver job, maybe not a nurse job, maybe not a teacher's job. They have other mechanisms for finding their people. But for many people, if you had a decent job, decent professional job, they will check there first. Okay, yes?
I've tried several times
All right, so, I mean, I can't solve that, obviously, because I don't have your computer. But I would talk about it. Greg Taylor also does workshops, except I don't know if they're being done now. How many people here are on the August group? Okay, good. The August group is a professional group, networking group. It's well worth your time. And if you look at augustgroup.org, you can see their calendar and their schedule of events. And Greg Taylor is a member of the August group, and he was offering 2 workshops on LinkedIn free at Fairport Library. And the second one, you actually took your laptop in. But right now, excuse me, Fairport's in temporary housing, and so they don't have room for training programs. But I am going to get in touch with him to see if he's going to go to any of the other libraries and maybe do it. Because I always thought that was good, because if you had your computer right there, you could see why it wasn't working for you. But thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you.